My name is Joshua Gibson, and you are listening to the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast, a show dedicated to promoting a message of critical thinking as it pertains to strength training, nutrition, and well-being. This is done through interviews with experts, high-level athletes, coaches, and people heavily involved in strength sports and athletic development. Pull up a chair, grab a coffee, and let's get on to today's podcast. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Gibson, and this is a very special episode as it is the 200th episode of the podcast. It's one of those milestones that when you're like...
Are you going to introduce me? Sorry.
I think he just interjected himself into the podcast.
Welcome to the 200th episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast.
It seems we've been joined by Max Aita.
Classic way to start a podcast.
Very classic.
Having your guest totally introduce themselves.
Guest, co-host guest. I think you skirted that fine line. But yeah, I'm actually really excited to be joined by Max for a special episode. It's one of those episodes, it's kind of like when you're about to snatch, 120, say, and you're like at 118 or 115 or 112, and you're like, I'm just right on the edge. A few good training cycles. It's kind of how I felt looking down the barrel at 200, and now we're here. So I thought it'd be a fun opportunity to have Max on to chat a bit about weightlifting, what's been going on, just kind of reminisce, reflect back on memories with weightlifting, memories with podcasting, and then kind of what plans are. So Max, since you did jump in and make your presence known, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for thinking of me first before your podcast. No, I'm excited to be here. I think it's kind of cool that you've put together a podcast that has gotten to 200 episodes. I think the number of podcasts that reach 10 episodes, that's like a major cutoff, right?
Yeah.
So you hit 10 episodes and then you kind of die off. You hit 20 episodes or 50 episodes is probably even smaller. So like that funnel of number of shows that have gotten that far, and in a niche, I mean, niche is probably the word we use the most.
Yeah.
Niched and nuanced podcast, like a topic like weightlifting, to go as far as you have to be at 200 episodes right now is pretty impressive. I don't think there's that many weightlifting centered podcasts that have gone that far. Which is impressive. So, well done. That's pretty cool. It's an accomplishment. I mean, it's a big thing, right? I mean, a lot of podcasters don't have that kind of staying power. Yeah.
No, I think you're right too. And they're kind of like podcasts come and go. There are a handful of episodes. They get on kind of the same guest, and they just, you're right. They don't have anything that allows them to kind of stand the test of time.
Yeah, very much.
And I think, for people who are listening and are thinking, I want to start a podcast, or I'm really interested in maybe being on one or being a part of it. And it's like, the thing about it, and I mentioned this to someone else, is it's not just like this want or this desire to create content. Sometimes I think it's easy to get into, say, weightlifting or a related field, or just like some sport or some interest or hobby, and think like, oh, I want to be the expert. How do I become the expert? Or how do I put out content and become known as like the person who's able to deliver educational or, I don't know, media information? And a lot of that's like kind of backwards.
Yeah. I was just going to ask you, like, like your what was your intent when you started the podcast? Because it seems like there's two kinds of people in this world of weightlifting, right? Of this like niche sport, which is, there's the kinds of people that do it because they love it, and they either they happen to be successful because they saw that, hey, in order for me to continue being involved in this thing, I have to do one of any number of jobs that can pay to be part of it,
right?
Like be a media person or create videos and content for people, or coach or run a gym. And so they did that almost as a means to an end to stay involved in it.
Right.
And then there's people that come into it that found it and liked it and or they see it as like there's an opportunity here to make money, but if a better opportunity came along, they would abandon lifting. Whereas the first person would just be like, well, you know, that's a means to an end to be more in weightlifting, right? Like, you know, oh, I can do seminars and like that can keep me in it, or I have something to share, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it seems like I see a lot of people start things with the intent of trying to make money at that, and those people don't sort of stick around that much. But you didn't seem to start that. I mean, if you did, that was you failed at that miserably. But yeah, like you didn't seem to start this podcast as a way to like a vehicle to like here's how I'm going to get rich.
Yeah. One, I think, you know, there are two things to kind of say off that. The first is like what ultimately I think drove me to start podcasting. And it was actually something John North said, and it was this idea of like anyone can start a podcast, anyone can kind of start not telling their story, but like start talking about weightlifting, start putting information out there. They can get kind of their voice heard. And that was like actually very convincing, because it's like anyone can start a podcast. You can take that as like there's a low barrier to entry. I can just put anything I want out there. Or it's like, oh, this is a cool opportunity to be able to start developing like my expertise and sharing that. So I started a podcast, and it was like awful, right? It's the first iteration, and the amount of effort I put into it was kind of commensurate with like what I wanted to get out of it. I just started recording on an iPad in like a car during like some ride from place to place.
Right.
I just record shows on Spreaker. I just like record a show, upload it, and be like slaying the dragon, and then it'd go to 3 people. And
Sick.
And I started myself initially. And it's kind of funny though, because then I got my buddy on, Marty, and we had this like pretty interesting dynamic. We recorded a handful of shows live, so I'd go over to his place. We'd like cook dinner, make an event out of it, have coffee. He like would make a French press.
Was his coffee as good as mine?
Not nearly.
Good.
This is much more bitter, much better.
Good.
And I'd go to his place, and we just like hang out and talk weightlifting. And
so nothing in your life has changed for the last 10 years. What you're saying?
That's actually exactly right.
Yeah.
By design.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
Right. You can still be part of weightlifting on the level you want.
Yeah.
And have a life.
Yeah.
And like live in a way that like okay, you can support yourself. I mean, it might not be the easiest, right? If you were like some project manager at Facebook, like you probably make more money, but you know.
Well, it's funny because I think you feel this way and I feel this way too, but sometimes I don't know if it's an incorrect feeling. But I'll tell people like, what'd you do today? And it's like, well, I kind of got up and like did some laundry and ate breakfast, and did a little programming.
Yeah.
Went and grabbed coffee with Max and just like talk training.
Yeah.
Went and lifted, did a little more work, and they're like, that sounds like the life. Like, because most people are kind of chained to like this like really defined schedule, like really defined like you have to do this, you have to hit these objectives, you have to do all this shit for someone else. And they're like, I wish I had that freedom.
Right? Yeah. You know what's funny is there's a grass is always greener mentality. Yeah. This is something I've learned in my life through trial and error and just in my own experience to learn like what is and what isn't true. And like many times, like the best analogy I can give as to like being a business owner. And I say business owner because the word entrepreneur is for people that are not actually business people. Like people say entrepreneur and it really just means like one of 3 things. Like you think that like doing business is like a thing that like is fun and like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. Like, like I watch a bunch of like videos on the internet about like being an entrepreneur, but like being a business owner is like, the analogy would be, and this I think applies to what you've done, to any of the people that are like genuinely involved in this kind of stuff, where there's a level of uncertainty and a level of like you don't know what's going to happen, but you just feel a need to participate in this arena. Yeah. The analogy I can give is being a business owner and doing these kind of things is like it's like you're riding on top of a wolf, holding on to its ears, and everyone watching you is like, holy shit, that dude is so brave. Yeah. That guy is an absolute fucking savage. And you're on the wolf thinking, holy shit, if I fall off, I'm going to die.
Yeah.
and I just am trying to fucking hold on and survive. And that's, I think, what sums up a lot of this living in this world, right? Is like you're living, you know, in a lot of ways for years and on end, like hand to mouth and like trying to figure it out and gain a client, lose a client, do a good job, fail here, fail there, you know, put out, you know, 100 episodes of a podcast and you have no idea if anyone's going to listen to it or it's going to go anywhere. And there's a grass is greener thing where it's like people will look at, like, they'll look in the situation they're in and be like, oh man, shit sucks. Like, I don't have any money or I'm doing this or that. But like every day you get to get up and do something involving weightlifting. Yeah. And that's like a living you can make. 25 years ago, that just wasn't the case. And, you know, for those people that had got into the sport 2 years ago, you know nothing of 25 years ago in weightlifting, which is fine. But it's like, that's something that you have to have a sense of to appreciate. Yeah. That like being a person who creates content for weightlifting, being a weightlifting coach who creates content for weightlifting, or being a weightlifter who participates on this, and being able to turn that into something real is what elevates the sport. And it's what, you know, like the fact that that exists to me is like so cool and so awesome. And to see someone like you do it where it's like, oh, you know, I met you. The first time I met you was probably 2019, like in person when you came here. But like, you know, you could see it as like, oh, this is a guy I can relate to. Like, he's a lifter. He loves lifting. You love training. You love the idea of like thinking about it. Yeah. You know, there's very few people that I think fit that role that you can see that turn into something successful. Yeah. You know, I could like, I'll just go on a little rant here about like growing up in this stuff. When I first got into lifting, there was a lot of like coaches and clubs and lifters and a very big like fog, like the fog of what we all understood was super close to us. And so like no one had a great understanding of sports science and physiology and applied science to weightlifting, like in the US. It was there. Some people did, you know, Kyle Pierce. Yeah. I couldn't remember his last name. Kyle Pierce, probably a great example of that. John Garhammer. Yeah. But even that, the application of it was like, you know, mostly shrugs. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And you know, so like, okay, there was some of that, but there wasn't a lot of people that were like obsessed with like reading and understanding, you know, the like, oh, there's always like foreign manuals or foreign literature, right? Like, and all this. And also at the same time, people that were obsessed with like, what lifts did Blagojev do in 1982? Yeah. And so it was all existed, but it was like, there wasn't people that were in it on the level that like, I would say your sort of love for, you know, you're not the guy who remembers the, you know, 1979 World Championships like roster, like Seb does. Yeah. But you're the guy who would think about like, you know, like we had a discussion yesterday about the app and like talking about like, well, how do you decide how many reps somebody does? Yeah. And it's like, some people just gloss over that and it means nothing. And that's fine. But you're somebody who I could actually sit down and have a discussion like, well, what factors do we actually think about? Like, what are the variables that go into that decision making? And that's something you have a passion for. Yeah. And that's really cool to me that like there's somebody who can be that niched, that hyper focused on a really tiny thing that seemingly doesn't matter to most everybody, but does matter because it's a question of like, well, it's like learning and understanding your world and how your world works. Yeah. And your world is weightlifting. Yeah. And like, how do you go about day to day finding truth in your world? Yeah. Right. And yeah, this podcast to me is like a great example of a person who's seeking truth in their world. Their world happens to be weightlifting or training, right? Maybe more broadly, but you've manifested, you know, 200 episodes looking for that answer, looking for those answers.
What I think is really interesting, we've talked about this on our ride home from the CSA gym. Yeah. We went out there and Kasia lifted,
Got
and then
sick pumps.
we lifted together. Yeah, we did a bodybuilding
Sick
workout.
pumps. We did like Meadows rows,
Yeah.
lat pull downs,
Tricep extensions.
I mean, it was just like the most bro session.
It was a great workout.
It's awesome.
And we, on our way back, we were talking about like being in weightlifting and creating content and being a content creator that happens to create content about weightlifting,
right,
versus being someone in weightlifting who then can say like, okay, how do I take weightlifting, what I think about what I do, and then give that to people.
Yeah.
And it's funny, the podcast initially was describing training and what you experience when you lift, kind of like the content that's coming out now, where it's like you got to go, you train really hard, attack the bar.
Yeah.
Don't take a rest day.
Yeah.
Right. You just got to go heavy and be specific, and that's going to give you the best results. And like,
sort of like, what's the index card version of how to be a weightlifter?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like like a CT Fletcher index card.
Yeah.
Where it's like, how do we just fucking grind through it and work our asses off? And like, that's great. But it wasn't anything of like substance.
Yeah.
It was just kind of like, here's how you should feel about lifting and what you can expect, and what you should like, how you should interpret all that. And then it turned into, there's a very distinct point in time where I wanted to bring it back. And the first guest was my buddy Tom, who will be out here Monday. You'll meet him.
Oh, yeah.
You'll see him again. Yeah. So you'll see him. He majored in philosophy. He's a very thoughtful guy. Actually, he's like trying to develop his own app and like create this little business for himself, which is kind of cool.
Nice.
But the first few episodes were about training, and then I think we had on Jacob Sipkin, Mike Israel, and like Quinn Hennick, the first like handful of people.
That's a great lineup for your first few episodes.
Yeah, and so it's like you can see the obvious transition from talking about like attacking the bar to when I had Dr. Mike on, it was like one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my life, because it's like, here's this guy who knows training better than almost anyone else.
Yeah.
And I have to ask him questions that are like thoughtful and like consider the training process in a way that reflects his understanding of it and can communicate that to people. And instantly it's like, that's when I was hooked. And I told Dr. Mike, I was like, I really want to get a degree and kind of follow your footsteps. And like, it seems like what you did was really cool. And that's just the way the podcast ended up going from there. And then it was like, a bunch of people, since we've had on like, all the barbell medicine guys, clinical athlete guys, had you on multiple times. Pretty much anyone who's a big name in research for weightlifting or like coaching and even competing, that I would consider thoughtful. Like, for example, Meredith was a great example of that.
Yeah.
So I think it was cool. It's like, there are these like distinct chapters. And I think that's what people who get into weightlifting kind of experience too.
Yeah.
I think now maybe with like the information you put out, content you've developed, what, Weightlifting House is doing, you can get into weightlifting and be like up to speed much quicker.
Yeah.
But when you get into it initially, it's like, I just want to train really hard.
Yeah.
Like, don't talk about sets and reps. Just go in, snatch, clean and jerk, or, some iteration of that, and just like kind of push the gas down. We're not seeing that quite as much, just because there's so much information about training smart.
Yeah. It's funny to me because like, it's the idea to me was so foreign. The idea of like being a content creator to me is like, I'm not knocking people, but it's the dumbest thing in the world, because it's like I for me it never made sense. It's like the kind of person that feels validated to stand up and tell people how to do things is so foreign.
Yeah,
like, it's so foreign to me to be that confident in your abilities. Like, and like, it's not necessarily wrong, but like, it's like to like I'm going to make a channel. Like, what goes through someone's mind is like, I'm going to make a channel and I'm going to tell people how to do something. Yeah. And in a lot of cases, it's like you're speaking to people that are lower, lower on the totem pole, right? They've done no weightlifting. So you look like a god because you can do a clean and jerk. Yeah. And like to tell people about that from the perspective of, I'm an expert and you should listen to what I have to say, when the reality is that like everything you've learned was given to you by somebody else. Maybe there's been some personal experience and development, but everything's been done before, right? Like there's no doubt, like we used to make this joke that like the Chinese bought, the Chinese coaches probably bought starting strength and tried it. They gave it to 5,000 lifters to see what would happen, and like, oh, that didn't work, so they just moved on, right?
Yeah.
That like it's all been tried. It's
Yeah.
all, the Soviet Union they had 400,000 weightlifters at one point.
Yeah.
Like that's a different universe. Like
Yeah.
they did sports science on a level that we won't ever get to again.
Yeah.
With like this sport, but the idea of like being a content creator, someone who makes content for people about weightlifting, was super weird to me. Even when I was at Juggernaut, like making videos, like just standing in front of a camera and telling somebody about something was so weird, because like I never felt I could do that in a comfortable way. If someone asked me a question and they were like, hey, why would you do this and that? I could talk about it ad nauseum because I could relate to the question and I could answer it. But the idea that like, this is important information you're going to need to know, and I'm going to tell you, seems so strange to me.
Yeah.
So it's a funny world that like, that's the norm now, is like people will just get to a minimum enough level that they're better than 90% of the audience that they preach to, and then start talking about it. Right. And it's like, as soon as you start doing that, I feel like you end up potentially losing the ability to grasp where you actually stand on your own knowledge. It's like the Dunning-Kruger effect in execution.
Yeah.
Right. You get to a point where you're smart enough to know enough about things that you can tell people about it and pass on all this information. That's not like, is this real?
Right.
Like, is what you're saying real? Has it really worked for anyone? Or is it like the kind of thing that's like, well, it's a lot of like tips and tricks and sort of like flash in the pan, like quick
They're
things.
like factoids. It's basically like you show people you're smart by rattling off small little factoids about the world, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, do you know the Indian Ocean is this big? And it's like, I didn't, but like I also don't care. And it's like that. There's no context for that, and like a lot of the weightlifting stuff, there's not really any context for it. So I was listening to speaking of Dr. Mike, I was just listening to him on a podcast, and he was talking about like the whole best exercise thing on YouTube.
Yeah.
And how you like scroll through it. Even if you don't watch the videos, you get this like idea of there's a best something.
Yeah.
And you can kind of curate like, oh, they're like best chest exercise or leg exercises. And that's like the culture, like the social media culture we're kind of in now, where it's like there's a best thing and people are telling you the best thing. But you realize shortly that like if you understand it at a slightly deeper level, there's no best anything.
No, exactly. There's probabilities.
There are probabilities, better or worse options.
Yeah, it's all probabilities, and it's all like there's a directed effect from things.
Yeah.
But the question is like, well, it's like, okay, like what is the best exercise to make my legs strong? Well, like, okay, there's no context there.
Yeah.
Like legs strong in what way? Like what kind of strength? Like, and like what does your anatomy look like? There's like so many things that are just like, there's no context to it. So like, best top 5 best exercise. And we've done those videos because they're clickbait, right?
They're like, clickbait. You need views.
Yeah, I mean, like you got to pull people in so you can maybe give them an exposure to something more valuable later, right?
And I had this conversation with someone, and I don't remember exactly how. I was talking to someone who just got his first like powerlifting client.
Yeah,
he's a weightlifting coach, and he's like, "Hey, can you help me out?" I'm like, "Sure." I'm like, powerlifting is very simple, but it's a skill. Because if we just wanted to know who's the strongest person, we'd hook them up to a stationary rack, and we just have them pull on it.
Right.
So implementing a squat, it's a skilled movement, so you have to train the squat in a skilled way, and that's kind of the idea, right? So when you talk about strength, it's like there are so many definitions, and there's so many ideas of it, and it requires like a slightly deeper understanding, I think, than most people would have. But that's definitely. And I imagine your experience with training when you started out with golf and you trained as you did, as long as you did, I don't imagine you ever thought that would have turned into creating this popularity.
No.
And this like this background that gives you this like expertise and bolsters your.
It's funny because like I never think of anything I've done as being an accomplishment except for the athletes I've coached. Like I could say, so, whatever, 5 American record holders, Pan Am champion, like there's definitely, those are accolades because those are things that were done purely of my own hand, right? Like I sat down and created that and coached and, like I had a hand in fabricating that into reality. But like training really hard is not an accomplishment. Like anybody can train hard, like like I mean, it's like, sure, you might not have the mental fortitude to like do crazy workouts like that,
Right.
but like I don't think it's an accomplishment to like squat 10 times a day, 5
Yeah.
times a day. Like it's like easy. You just do it. Like people ask me that question, like, how do you squat every day? To me, it's like the stupidest program in the world. It's like, how do you squat every day? You just do it. You just go in and squat.
Yeah.
Well, it's like okay, but it's like those things never felt like
Yeah.
accolades. So like anything that came from that, like I feel like it's kind of a question of like if somebody was to take a person and put them in a situation where they could succeed and they didn't, then that person's just like, just they're trash, right? I
Yeah.
mean, whatever. They just they didn't grasp how to do that. And so it's like if you put somebody in a situation where they can't succeed and they do, that's an incredible person.
Yeah.
You put someone in a situation where they can succeed and they don't, it's just like amazing that they don't.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like I see it as like, oh yeah, I had everything I need. I had a coach who was going to train hard like that. I had the ability to go do it. It might have been difficult to like, drive there and, not have a lot of money to train, but like, I don't think there's any kind of thing such as adversity. It's just like, well, the situation existed to do it, so I went and did it, right? And so it never felt like that stuff was an accomplishment.
Did you, when you went to train with Abajev, I guess like weightlifting was just so different in that like, one, it hadn't caught on YouTube. Like
Yeah.
there's no like weightlifting media culture that we have now where there's just like a ton of it and it's everywhere all the time. When you went to train with Abajev, were you thinking like this is going to have a payoff down the road?
No, because that was an interesting time because like when it actually happened, it came out and Dave put a website up and you could come and train. They were asking $1,000 a month to do it, which then was a lot. That was crazy for a weightlifter.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the IWF had issued a statement stating anyone training with him would be banned for life. So it was like not an encouraging scenario.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, I have to do it.
Yeah.
Because like my coach, was like so into it. Like he was so into the Bulgarians and Abajev, and he just, it was more like no matter what the outcome was, I was going to do it. And I said to myself when I went down there, I was like, I'll do whatever he says.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to sit there and like go and not have the experience. So if he says, you got to eat shit. Okay, can I put salt on it? Like, I mean, it would have just been like whatever he said.
Yeah.
We're squatting today to maximum and 15 times. Like, do it. We're gonna max snatch, do it. And like, yeah, that was the kind of thing where there were very few moments in my life doing those things that were like, I felt proud of like the choices I made.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, I went, I put everything I had in and got destroyed, and like, okay, that happens, right? Like, but it was worth doing to get answers. This is fundamentally people that care about something in their world, like that are seeking truth, are gonna do whatever it takes to get there, right? It's like the same thing for me going there and training with him was to find the answers, like answers that I had, which was like, does this work?
And you felt like the reward was well worth the risk.
Yeah, I mean, there was no risk in my mind. Like, I wasn't a good lifter. I wasn't gonna like fucking banned or whatever. Who cares? Or like you're out money, you get hurt. Like those things all are temporary, right? Like the victory was literally just getting there.
Yeah.
Like just being allowed to go there was I already won.
Yeah.
And meeting him and going there, I already won. Like everything else was just a cherry on top. Yeah. It's funny though, right? Because like I think back to it, and I'd be curious to see your opinion on this, but I look back on the last 20 years of my life, and I think at no moment moving forward in time through those 20 years did I think that what I did was going to put me into a different place. Like I never looked at it like, okay, in 2 years I'll be here, in 4 years I'll be here.
Yeah.
It was just like I ended up 4 years later in a different place doing something else.
Yeah.
I never intended when we started the gym in 2012, I never intended there to be something other than like, we need a gym. We have a gym now. We coach people and like we train there. or like I'm going to do powerlifting now. That's going to take me to some other place. Or I'm going to, you know, it was just like whatever comes my way, I just say yes and do it. And like coach this person, coach that person, you know, like I fucking Sharice Chan's a great example. Like she came in the gym and just like she was a CrossFitter and like, okay, wow, you could be really good, you know, and then she goes to Cal Strength and then she gets popped and then like, okay, what's the next step from there? You know, and so we'll just keep doing the next thing because it was just a matter of like you're just riding that wolf, right? Like, oh shit, like, well, you know, what's the next thing? So you never think about like this thing is going to equal that thing. And I think that's the difference between people like yourself and some people that get into this stuff now that see it as like, I'm going to get into this and use it as a vehicle to the next thing.
Yeah.
Right.
The path, they've defined the path.
Right.
I think too, you know, we talked about kind of what like our days look like. And I think what that does, like that freedom allows you to make those decisions that opens up so much more.
Sure. Yeah.
Opens up like a lot of opportunity, but it's like, this is what I was thinking about. It's like, it's like unidentified and you can't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So you, like you mentioned, you kind of make a decision and like 4 years later, you're just somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, with the podcast, and I put a little post on Instagram when I was trying to like, just kind of make a little thing about the virus sponsorship. And it's like, I remember watching John North, his vlogs way back when he was sponsored by Virus, and he'd like push the code. And I was like, oh shit, I'm going to buy all this Virus stuff. And it's just so cool. And I love these vlogs so much. And then, you know, to meet Melanie and to work with Virus and to like even just make some money from that is like a really cool opportunity.
Yeah.
It's like, I never thought it'd come from the podcast.
Yeah.
Express the passion that defines you. At Virus, we understand that when it comes to performance, the slightest edge can mean the difference between winning and losing. Each product is designed and tested with performance in mind. This principle inspired the technology that is infused into our apparel. Built with the intention to move with you and work for you, we create tools meant to help express the passion that defines you. The future of technology-driven apparel. Improve performance, prevent fatigue, recover faster, and go further. Virus is a proud sponsor of Josh Gibson and the Philosophical Weightlifting podcast. Use code PHILWL for 10% off at checkout. That's PHILWL, PHILWL for 10% off.
And I remember when...
What's your Virus code?
It's PHILWL.
Yeah, you
know, 20% off through the rest of April. It's 10% now because this is coming out after April. But yeah, like Weightlifting House, they ended up getting a code through Virus for a while, and he was kind of pushing that. I thought that was so badass. But like, you know, you start a podcast, and I think people start it, and they're like, I'm gonna bring all these people on and get these sponsorships, and I don't know if anything works that way.
The sponsorship thing to me is funny because it's like sponsorship just like it's so pointless. like I get this sponsorship. Like if someone's like, I got sponsored, they're giving me $1,000 a month to tell people I eat this protein. Like that's okay, cool, I get that, right? Yeah. Like you got to make money. But like the idea of sponsorship, I think this is a little bit less now, but I would say like 5 years ago, 4 years ago, it was huge. Like, oh my God, everybody's getting sponsored. Remember like United Lifters?
RP?
Like, RP just would vomit them out to everybody, right? I mean, anybody can get a code, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's this thing of like, it's everything other than the substance that matters.
Yeah.
Saying you're sponsored, being, you know, recognized for that, or, you know, it's like this thing like putting entrepreneur in your bio.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Like there's entrepreneurs all over the place. They own restaurants and car dealerships and, you know, like a coffee shop. Like
the grind don't quit.
Yeah.
Sun up, sun down.
They don't talk about that. They're just too busy like trying to run the business and not dying. Right.
Right.
They don't watch grind set videos, you know, like, oh, I'm going to start my
Gary V.
Yeah, I'm going to start my LLC tomorrow. It's like that takes 15 minutes to do. Like you just go and set one up. But yeah, it's like a funny thing because it's like it seems like there's this quick. It's the whole thing, which is like maybe this is just like the curmudgeon in me now, but it's like the whole thing of like people getting into this as a vehicle or people using any of this stuff because the thing they really want is recognition.
Yeah.
Right. And I always saw it as like, you know, I do it because I love this.
Yeah.
And wow, that's really cool to have an accomplishment and someone recognizes you for it.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. One of the most satisfying moments for me was 2015 AO, when Sharice Chan broke the American record, I walked from the platform to the back room to the bathroom, and on the walk I ran into like 5 or 6 coaches.
Yeah.
And they were like, they shook my hand
Yeah.
and were like, "Man, that's a great job you've done," because it was the first time I'd coached someone to that.
Wow.
Obviously, it was super shameful later when
Yeah.
whatever happened, but like it was a moment of like feeling awesome that someone would recognize you for that.
Yeah.
Or like when I trained with Abajev, and he one day said to Kraichev, he's like, he told Kraichev something. Kraichev said to me, Abajev says that he's impressed with you training. You train just like Naeem. You train very fast. Like, you
Yeah.
don't sit down. And I was just like, that was fucking awesome.
Yeah.
But it was like, that doesn't, I'm not going to tell, I've said on the podcast, I just said it, but like, it's not the kind of thing you sit there and like make a video about it to proclaim
Yeah.
anything. It's like the recognition was for me, and that was something I just get to carry with me, that like, that was cool.
Well, and I think that's a great point. I think, this is kind of like a meta podcast where we just talk about things that are related. We talk about the podcast. And I think when I kind of started out, I think it was just like getting people on to talk training so I could learn about training. And that happened to extend into like 150 episodes. And then I just like had a bunch of conversations with Chris Amenta.
Yeah.
I had a relationship with SoCal. I had Antonio on. And then honestly, it was just like, he loved the podcast so much. And we're like, oh yeah, just you work with Onyx and get some stuff and get like make some money off of it. And it was one of those things where like you could get sponsors at any point, just reach out to companies and get a code or get free shit. But like Onyx, I think having developed that kind of organically, and it was like, oh, it's something that I think is really cool because they're not just handing them out to everyone. It's like the best weightlifting equipment. So it's just cool, right?
Yeah.
It's cool to make those relationships happen a little more organically. But no, I get exactly what you're saying.
Yeah,
like
it's
having,
like
no, like the whole recognition thing.
Yeah, it's a different world now. It just feels like it's something that like seems like, which is cool about your podcast and just cool about this kind of stuff in general. Like, it definitely, like, there's the category of people, like I was saying before, where it's like they fall into a category if they love this and they find a way to stay in it.
Yeah.
And they find a way to be a part of it because they want to experience it. And if no one else cared about it, they'd still care about it just as much. Right? If the sport of weightlifting completely evaporated everywhere, like, you'd still care about what's going on it and how to train and lifting and all these things. Whereas like that's definitely like the fluff around it wouldn't care. They'd move on to something else, right? If you couldn't get 100,000 Instagram followers being a weightlifter, they would look for the next thing they could. Yeah, you pivot something else. And it's interesting because like, it takes what it takes to do that and have that sustainable, like, or to have that staying power.
Yeah.
Like 200 episodes of this podcast. I mean, God, 180 of them must be trash.
Right. Well, only the ones you were on.
Yeah. The 180 that I were on. But it's like, okay, you got 200 episodes. It's like, the question is like, when you started it, you didn't expect that.
Yeah.
And now it's a question of like, when you started it, you probably were in college, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so now you're literally a few days from leaving California, which you probably didn't expect to do.
No.
To live here.
No.
You're a few days from moving out of this to go to West Virginia to become a PhD.
Yeah.
And like the podcast has been the whole time there. It's been with you the whole time.
It's been there the entire time. Yeah, which is surreal. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the same thing. And this is where I think like I think the best relationships are formed, and I think why Seb and I are so close, and like, like also like some other people, but it's because you're able to see it through. Yeah. See through all of that with them, right? Like Seb's been here since I was like. I was working, I was like cleaning houses, and we'd do podcasts while I was at work in like someone else's house in someone else's room. Nice. I just like post up, open the laptop. We would record for an hour and a half. This was like 2015, maybe a little later. But I was like, I was in my undergrad, and we talked just like hypertrophy, and we just would podcast for an hour and a half and then get back to work. Yeah. And you kind of like fit it in. You'd go to the gym, you'd train, you'd coach a little bit. And, everything revolved around it. And it was like, how do I just like think about it and talk about it all the time? And I remember I would just listen to, I kind of forget how just like grossly obsessed I was. Yeah. And it was just and I do this now too, so it's no different, but it'd be hours and hours and hours of listening to people talking weightlifting. I mean, all of the content you put out, I've listened to all of it, read all of it.
Yeah.
Glenn, I literally have read his blogs multiple times,
Yeah.
his books, the podcast, the weightlifting talk, weightlifting house, like everything.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of like what you felt like you should do for no particular reason, because you know there's no return on it. So like with weightlifting, I was also talking to someone else, and I was thinking, why weightlifting?
Yeah.
Like
I asked
what's
that
the
question a
draw
lot.
about that? Because it's just such a niche
I
sport.
was at the Europeans, and I was talking to somebody. I'm not going to name them, but I asked them, like, this person doesn't have to do this.
Yeah.
They don't have to do anything they're doing. And I was asking, like, why weightlifting? Like, why are you here? Not like, you know, like, what the fuck are you doing here? But like, they were just like, I love weightlifting.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I get that, because I understand that, because I
Yeah.
love it. And like, I would watch. I was like, we would do commentary for like 2 sessions. It starts at like 5 and it ends at like, 10:30. And so you're like, okay, there's 5 hours of watching weightlifting. And then I would like wake up the next morning, and I was like going back on YouTube watching like weightlifting competitions from the 80s.
Yeah.
I'm like, why? And like, it didn't bother me. It
Yeah.
wasn't like, oh my God, I'm slogging through this. I have gotta watch the
Gotta stay
1982
up to
World
speed.
Cup. Someone's got to do it. And it was just like, yeah, just watch it. And it's like, I just love it. And you just love watching it. And you love the history, and you love the lifts. There's just something about it that's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's the kind of thing where it's like, it's so exciting and appealing to see
Yeah.
that it's just like, this is cool.
Yeah.
This is just like, it's like almost like primal. Like it strikes at something in your mind and your psyche that is so much deeper than just like, it's like a human need, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's weird. It's like watching someone do some kind of movement that like you can feel it almost when they're doing it, like how great that's got to feel.
Yeah.
Right. It's probably similar, like watching, like pornography, where it's like, like it's like, it's not like a trick in your brain, but it's like you're watching something that like you can't control, like how you feel about it.
Yeah.
You don't have control of your feelings, right?
Yeah.
So you see something, there's an instinct like, oh, this is like really awesome to watch this person, lift this barbell, because you can relate to it in your body almost.
No, and I don't know how like true this is, but I've read about it, and I've heard educated people talk about it. But you have like mirror neurons.
Right.
It's basically like neurons that when you watch a movement pretty much create like the same activation pattern of you performing that movement.
Right.
And I think this is just like interacting with people too. You mimic what they do. You're able to kind of feel what they feel. So you essentially like watch someone perform a lift, and it's like activating in a similar way.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're basically like experiencing what's happening.
Exactly. Yeah. That's how I would describe weightlifting. Watching it's like you're experiencing what they are doing.
Yeah. But it's like, it's just subconscious enough that you can't quite.
Yeah.
You can't quite like feel it happening, but like something's going on underneath the hood.
Yeah. Right. It's a very interesting phenomenon for sure. But yeah, it's like, I think about it like, that's the kind of thing where it's just so, it's just such a like, it's difficult to pinpoint what the feeling is. But the whole point I was getting to is like the obsession of like, it's like, I don't have the same feelings of weightlifting that I did when I lifted.
Yeah.
It's different, but like, it's still like very much this feeling of like, oh, these things are there. Like I care very much about the training and coaching and like these things and like the way it works and how everything happens, and like watching lifts and doing these things and like wanting to, as an athlete, I wanted to be the best athlete. As a coach, you want to be the best coach. As like a business person or creating a product, you want to do something that gives back, like be a part of, like influential part of it. Right.
Well, and I think this is kind of reflected back on you. I talk about the podcast and how it had like distinct phases, and I think it will continue to have that as I get into the PhD program. It's going to be more focused probably on research or on kind of like exploring more nuanced topics. But the one thing I noticed with you that I find really interesting, and I was like picking around at it when we were talking in the kitchen about the AI and how you've been developing that over the years and how it kind of started and what that looked like. Because you think about training really interestingly. We were in the office, and it was you, Sean, and myself, And I was just like listening to you talk about training and how you almost talk about it now or think about it in a way that like a programmer would,
Yeah.
and how you have all these decision trees, and how like to really make a decision you have to have like rules for it, or like
Yeah.
ways of doing that make sense and can hold under a lot of different circumstances.
Yeah.
It's not just like, well, you kind of intuitively want this. It's like, why would you do a set of 5?
Yeah.
It's like, how do you get there?
Yeah.
Explain it and
Yeah.
defend it almost.
Yeah.
It's like a really interesting place to get to, because I think that's like, that space of thinking is like probably reserved just for you, someone who would have to make it
Sure. Yeah.
formatted for like an AI app,
Right.
and like an AI driven app. Whereas like most people don't have to make that leap. They just go from like being an athlete to being a coach to writing programs.
Yeah.
But then to go, okay, I need to write a program that's going to write programs,
Yeah.
is like, is
Well,
like really next level.
It's also the kind of question like I think we're very similar in that like I don't like the idea that you can gloss over things, because I mean that's what I did when I trained. Like,
Yeah.
and I think it's a valuable thing as an athlete. Like you should just be a savage. You go in the gym and doesn't matter what's on the paper. You don't need to know these things.
Yeah.
But as a coach or as a person, like imagine you do a profession and you don't understand why things work the way they do. And there's professions that definitely work that
Yeah.
people don't understand. Brain surgeons, right? Like that we have a lot about the brain we don't know.
Yeah.
But we know we can do some things and fix things and
Right.
help people. But it's a question. It's like the whole thing, like the sets of 5, right? It's like we see so many decisions that are made that we can't even trace back to where that came from.
Yeah.
Why did we make this choice? Yeah. And someone along the way, someone made a conscious number of decisions to get to that end result that they might not be aware of.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, well, I need to know that. I need to know why you get to that decision, because if you do, then you can replicate it and you can improve it. And if you don't know why you get to those decisions, you have nothing.
Yeah.
You literally, it's like you don't know. You're not actually the person steering the ship anymore. It's just happening.
Yeah.
Like, because it's like, what if you write programs and the programs work well and you don't know why you make all those choices?
Yeah.
It's like, we do 5 sometimes, we do 4s, we do 3s, whatever. And for whatever reason that works, and that's fine. But what happens when it stops working?
Yeah.
Or what happens when it doesn't work for somebody?
Yeah.
And you have no idea how to like backtrack and look at those decision making process and say, why do we do this?
Yeah.
Like, why did I make that choice? And like, is there a complete logical chain to get to there, or is there not? And it's like, we need to figure this out more and define why we did this. Right.
Yeah.
That to me is like, it's just like insane to me that we would be in a profession, we would do something like this and not be able to explain every single choice we made, and defend it. And like, if we can't do that, then like, you're just kind of like, you're literally just throwing things on paper and like, here you go.
Yeah.
And it might work. That's fine if it works, but it's just weird to me.
Yeah.
So I very much have this like desire to do that. And I think you were very similar in the way that like, you look at like, you've had so many guests, you've talked about so much training, you understand so much, that it's a question of like, like when we talk about training, you'll say things that are like, well, like we were talking one time about something, if you do like a primer session prior to the day of lifting heavy, and I was playing the devil's advocate and I asked like, well, is the effect even that significant? And you're like, well, it's significant enough to measure. And it's like, oh yeah, that statement's true enough. Like, yeah, well, if you can measure it, then it has some significance.
Yeah.
And then the question is like, okay, well, that's something real. Do we take that into account? Is that something you can use and implement? And if so, if it makes somebody a little bit better, then they might win.
Yeah.
They might do a little better in training and be successful in competition. And so for me, everything has always come down to this point of like, I want to do it not because it's not, my goal is not to spread weightlifting around the world, right? Yeah. Like some people will claim that is, but the goal is to make badass weightlifters that win. Like as a coach, that was always my thought. Like everything I do has to be directed at getting someone to win.
Yeah.
And like, when you change training philosophies or you pull new information in and digest it and do something with it, like you're going to use the things that work and discard the things that don't. You only do things the way you do because they're so far the most proven way to get the best results, right? And so it's funny that like I said, like it's like funny to me, like I couldn't, if I don't know why I made a choice, it drives me crazy. Because I'm sitting there like, well, what is the actual decision making process?
Yeah. Do you think that was there before you started working on the AI?
Yeah.
Or do you think it's okay?
Yeah, it was very much there, because there was a lot of that questions like, okay, you look at like you read like a Russian manual or something, you look at like a Prilipin's table or something, and you're like, okay, this is information that has value. How do you apply this? Why do you do, why would you do 6x3 instead of 5x4? Like, what's the difference between those? And not so much that like there's a difference, but like, what is the underlying principle for deciding between those things? And you could easily just write it off with a quick thing of like, oh, well, you do triples in this phase and fours in that phase. It's like, well, that's really simple. It's one layer of a tree. It's probably much deeper than that.
Do you think weightlifting allowed you to explore this more? Because obviously, like, looking at how you've thought about weightlifting and how much time you've put into it, that's like it's incredible. So I tend to think we're normal, right? I'm like, oh, this is just like normal. Like, we just obsess about weightlifting and obsess about one thing and spend all this time doing it. And like, most people don't. Like,
they don't obsess about anything.
No, most people don't obsess about anything. If anything, it's like, how do I make money so I can go home and relax?
Yeah.
And I'm going to relax until I have to work, and I'm going to work until I can relax.
Yeah.
And it's like this process of
NPCs like running around, right?
So it's like, before you found, and I've thought about this a lot, because it seems like now I talk about myself all the time, but up until I hit like 20 years old and got into lifting weights, I was kind of like an NPC. Like, I just kind of like did whatever people did around me, and I kind of like worked and tried to make money, and like was unsuccessful doing that. So I played video games, and then once I got into lifting, and once I started getting into like programming, which I remember I watched some YouTube videos Alberto Nunez put up about programming, and I pretty much just like copied them and started doing that. And then I took the reins, and I was like, I'd have workout partners, and I'd always want to be the guy providing the program. So we do, 5x5 and upper lower and all this shit. But that's when I finally got into something that I was like, oh, I can think a lot about this. And like nutrition. So I dieted and massed a lot, and I think a ton about it. It was like the first time in my life I could pursue something and just like entirely give myself intellectually to it. Were you like that before weightlifting? Or was weightlifting like the thing that allowed you?
Weightlifting was always there. So like, I started so young that like, but I'm like that with everything. Like if I get into like woodworking and stuff, it's not just like, oh, like just the most basic level. It's always like, what is the greatest extent that I can learn about how this process works?
You do that with grilling too.
Yeah. Everything. It's like, if I get into it, I'm going to get into it and like learn about cool. Like, well, I think it's cool because like, one, it's, you can do that now. Like, YouTube allows you to do that. Like, the internet allows you to learn tons of knowledge. And so people can quickly get up to a level of near expert within very short amount of time. Like chess. Chess is a great example where it's like, it's so easy for people to go from never playing chess to being like a very good player, because the amount of knowledge and the ability to teach people is so accessible that like, prior to the internet, you'd have to have read books and learn. Like, now you could like very quickly become good, right?
Or you can give off the appearance that you're good.
Yeah, and I mean, you can be good. I think people accelerate the development of that very fast. Same with weightlifting. There used to be like no teaching method for how to like learn snatch or clean.
Seriously, I remember watching Glenn's video of like hip, knee, floor.
Right. Yeah.
And that was probably like advanced.
Yeah. Right. Here it is, a progression.
Yeah.
And now it's like, like, I think you look at like Tarakti's progression fits in a 60-second Instagram video, and it's like, that's really good. That's like a really good way to learn. Yeah. And like, holy shit, this is like, this happens quick. But like, I was like, weightlifting was always there, so it was always the vehicle for doing that. I read, even when I was training with Goff, I would read those Russian manuals Bud Charniga translated when he wasn't sleeping through sessions. And like, I read those over and over and over again, like every day. I would read some part of it again and again and again. And as I learned more and as time went on, I learned how to understand that information and apply more and read more about it and like grasp it. Where like when you first do it, you're just like absorbing information. You don't know what to do with it, or how to understand it. But yeah, I mean, I was always like, well, why would this decision be made? Like, why do you do that? Like, you could look at a Russian program, and be like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah.
It looks like there's patterns, and then you follow this pattern and it just stops.
Yeah.
Like, what's happening there? Why does this exist?
Yeah.
And it's like, unless somebody was to explain exactly the reasoning, you have to start to try to figure it out. And it's not even like you're trying to figure it out because like, if I unlock this, I'll write the best programs ever. It's like, I want to understand this so I can understand what I'm doing. So like when I say do X, Y, and Z, I know where that decision making is coming from.
It feels like it's from the hip when people observe it. But when you've worked through it, you're like, oh, me telling someone to put more weight on the bar is actually like founded on this idea or this like these like aspects of their training.
Yes.
Or like me observing these certain things about the training session.
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh, we go heavy because we want to go heavy. It's like, oh, we need more of a strength stimulus, whatever it is, whatever reason. I think it's cool because you have this, it sounds like you have this underlying motivation, using it kind of more broadly, but like you have this underlying motivation to be successful and to like, to kind of win from like an athlete standpoint or from like a business standpoint. And I think it's cool because a lot of people get into it and they maybe don't have some motivation beyond just becoming more well-known or making money.
Yeah. You
want to win. For me, honestly, it's just like, I just love knowing as much as possible about it.
Yeah.
Like that's really what it's chalked up to.
Yeah.
Like listening to hours and hours of someone talking about like as of late, like hypertrophy, I just like get off on that. I don't know. I'm like, last night I was sitting in my chair. It's like 10 p.m. We went out to Habit Burger. We grabbed dinner, which was like delicious. And no, that was not last night. That was the day before. I actually hung out with Jordan from the gym.
Yeah.
And then I went home and I was like sitting in my chair eating Trader Joe's cookie butter ice cream, listening to Mike Israetel talk about hypertrophy. I did that for like a few hours.
Yeah.
And then read like a textbook on strength and conditioning before bed.
It's funny too, right? Because it's like, I think that a lot of that, like the idea of like finding truth in your world, is what drives innovation.
Yeah.
It drives new thinking. Like, it's so easy for people to just be like, oh, this is the way it is.
Yeah.
Just do that. It's you don't need to make it complicated. Just keep it simple, right? Like that's what that's really doing. And that's a definite, like, it's a cancer. That kind of mentality is a cancer to the greater base of like people's progress in the sport or anything. Is to say one of two things, is to be one side or the other. One way is to be like, it's so complicated you'll never be able to learn it all, and like you have to have everything super meticulous, and like too far to that side, which paralyzes people. And then the other side, which is to say like, oh, stop making it complicated. It's just really easy and simple and straightforward. Just do this. Because what that does is it kills any curiosity someone has, right? And so if no one is curious about it, no one's going to innovate, and no one's going to try to discover more. So if you have something that's in front of you that's like, hey, why do you do sets of 3? And it's like, oh, well, we just do it. That's just it's on the program, or we got to do 100 reps, we're doing triples. Whatever the answer is, like if you're not the kind of person, or nobody exists in the world where they're like, let me think about that more.
Yeah.
Let me try to figure out maybe why that would happen. Or let me try to create a process where there's a system of rules that governs why this happens, and see if that system of rules holds up in every scenario. And if it does, maybe I've discovered something. And if I discovered something, maybe I can play with and manipulate those variables to do something a little better as time goes on, right? It's like the idea, like, okay, like the size of the sets is determined by, how much volume is planned for the workout, the intensity of the weight, but also like, the what happened in the last session, what happened in the last 4 sessions. Do we have to account for, variability? Do we want to increase variability by just changing the sets and reps? And if there's only so many options to change from, what are they? And then, does this person, have long limbs? Maybe they should do less reps per set at this intensity. And they have short limbs. Do we increase the set size? Like, there's like lots of variables you could go, and there's probably 10 more, right? So it's like, you think about all those decisions, and as a coach, you may have learned that already. Oh yeah, he's tall. Let's do doubles instead of triples. Or you watch someone and they start failing, you can make an adjustment. But it's like, to know all that ahead of time and be aware of why you make choices gives you the ability to build a platform that you can then become curious and implement that same scientific process into. And like, new knowledge is formed and people discover stuff. It's like, if everybody just was like accepted the common knowledge that existed about how to squat from 2000 to 2010, and it's like, oh, you sit back and do a leg curl. It's like your hamstrings move you up and down. It's like anyone with any basic anatomy understanding, like, that's not possible because your hamstring can't extend your knee. Like, it's just not, the only muscle that's going to create knee extension is your quad, right? And so it's like, but that was like, people would literally just fucking shit that out day after day after day. Like, it's you build your hamstrings. Your posterior chain's weak. That's why your squat's not going up. Today, people are like, that's retarded. Like, you would never think that. I mean, people sometimes probably still do, but like, it's like, if no one was curious and thought about it more, it just would never have gotten better. Right. And so there's no knowledge created. And I don't know. I think to me, that's the whole like essence of like all this, and like, is like finding truth in your world. And our world happens to be weightlifting. Your podcast is like one of those things where it's like the guests you've had on here and like the caliber of those guests elevates the people that listen to it. Because suddenly it's like you have exposure to somebody like a Chris Tabor or somebody who's doing real work in like research and can point to and say, hey, like, we've learned this. And that might be contradictory to something else, or it might be complementary and prove some way that we do things is right, and you should emphasize that or put more energy into that. Right. It's a funny thing that like those people that the people that we talk about, like, the Sebs of the world, the Josh Gibsons of the world, like, that are going out and they're caring so much about what happens in their world and their reality, and they're just trying to basically put their passion into the world. That is to say, I want to know a lot about lifting. I want to know a lot about training. I'm going to talk to people about it and see what can come from that. Or, Seb, I love the history of weightlifting. I love the sport. And to just share it with people, that to me is like, it's something special.
I feel like Seb's never done, like, I say this, never done it for anyone else. He does it for the fans, but like, Seb's never done it for anyone else. I think he's done it to make a living in weightlifting. And like, by doing it, he's allowed himself to make a living. And then it's like, how do I make a better living so I can do more of it? And it's just like, ultimately it becomes a question of like, how can I only do this? And then how can I support myself well enough so I can get other people to do it?
Well, it's a good example is the commentary. Like, they approached him because Eurosport basically was done. Like, they're like, we're not going to do the commentary for Europeans. So he got it. And I think Seb took it on as like, I can share the sport with people better through this vehicle than I could with just YouTube videos. And like, this is so funny. Like, people will blast him like, oh, it's now you have to pay for it. And it's like, for one, like, you had to pay for it before. Like, none of these things were free. Someone was paying somewhere. But the reality is like, well, but like, he's sharing the sport in a way that it wasn't shared well before. Like, the commentary that Seb gives is, at least the best I've seen. Right. Or heard. Like, I mean, it's very rare you're going to find a commentary that's like, that has that much knowledge behind it.
And the reason why he's so much better than everyone else isn't because he's spent more time in the sport. It's because he's spent more qualitatively and quantitatively better time in the sport. It's like every single thing he's done has been catered towards how do I communicate weightlifting to weightlifters, coaches, and fans. And that's like literally all he's done since like 2017 is like, how do I deliver weightlifting? That's his expertise. So you get great coaches on, and you get like people who know weightlifting, and they've like seen a lot of it and they've spent time in it, but like no one has studied it like Seb has. And that's why it's a qualitatively and quantitatively like better product, hands down, and will forever continue to be, because no one else is going to do what he's done.
Well, he cares about it too. That's the biggest thing. Like, he's passionate about what's happening.
Right.
I mean, maybe not like in a, whatever, some session that's kind of like dull, but like
Yeah.
he cares about it, and he understands enough to showcase and explain like, hey, this person's doing this, it means this, and they have to make this, and blah blah blah. And it's like it's not a like just sort of like he's not trying to get everyone else to understand how much he knows. He's trying to get them to feel like they know as much as he does.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
You know, and that's like a huge key, and why, you know, like what Weightlifting House does is great. But also same with the podcast, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's not a matter of trying to tell people how smart you are. It's trying to get other people to see like how smart they can be about it, what they can learn about it.
And it's a natural curiosity. And one thing, and I was going to mention this because I think this podcast now is kind of like a reflection and like just kind of like thinking about what we've done and what we're doing. And one thing I felt that's different here, kind of like working with you and like just being out here in general versus being in weightlifting. It's like when you're in weightlifting, it's kind of moving at like a snail's pace. It's like you get a couple people at the club, you like host a meet, you like coach some people at meets. But you never feel like they're like these like, I don't know. There are these like next steps that could be like the next thing or could really like radically change what you're doing. And kind of spending some time around you, it's like there are all these things in development and all these opportunities and possibilities, and they like actually happen, and you never know when the next one's going to happen.
Hey, what's up, weightlifters? Danny here, founder of Onyx Weightlifting Co., a leather accessories company specializing in weightlifting gear. In our shop, we make gear that doesn't get in the way of your performance because we understand that hitting lifts requires your full attention. Our straps, wrist wraps, and belts are designed to be comfortable and reliable, so all you need to do is make lifts. Thanks for listening to our friend Josh's podcast. You can continue to support him by visiting our online shop at onyxstraps.com and using his code PHILWL. That's PHILWL at checkout. See you on the platform.
It's just like
you never know.
It's stressful, but it's also like really cool because it's, you know, the commentary. Like I'm sure you never thought that would happen. Never thought of that, and just like because you've built this foundation of like experience and expertise and just doing things the right way and like creating all these connections with people and with the sport. It's like you're kind of approached for it. And you know, same to be said with Weightlifting House and Weightlifting AI and like building that relationship.
I don't think Seb ever expected me to call him and be like, hey, I want to do this.
No,
but
I bet.
One thing too, like I think that kind of comes back to the idea of like just people, if you have a plan in mind, like I'm gonna be a famous this, like you limit yourself to what possibilities could exist. But if you're the kind of person who's just taking the approach that like any decision that's reversible, just make the decision right away. If you can reverse it, like, you know, okay, like should I go to this meet and do this? Should I try commentary? Like, just do it. Because at the end of the day, you could reverse that later and just be like, that didn't work. Like, but if you don't try those things, you're never going to find it. Right. So it's like a podcast. Like, you could have stopped it. You know, you can always stop anytime you want, but if you just keep doing more, what happens to it? You know, what does it become? Something bigger. And, you know,
well, it's like, because I've done the podcast, I developed the skills of like interacting with experts, which allowed me to do coaches only with Weightlifting House,
exactly.
Which is like a great opportunity. And the next time we run one, I'll probably be doing the same thing. And it's like, okay, now things open up quite a bit more. It's like, how do we get more coaches into another platform and continue to kind of like spread information like that? And I think, when you try to evaluate it too much or you try to create value for it, you try to anticipate, you like lose sight of everything that's going to happen. So if I just thought I'll create a podcast and then I'll get big names on and then I'll blow up, make money.
You're waiting for something else to do it for you.
Right.
Because it's like, the reality is like, you just need to you need to be like as persistent as possible. And that's like something I would say I learned from Goff and Abajev was like, they just realized that the most impactful, like the most like beneficial, advantageous trait that human beings have is willpower, is the ability to just be persistent, right? Like Abajev would talk about it like animals don't have to be persistent. They just are put in an environment where they have to survive, and they do only what they have to survive. But a human being can kill themselves trying something. Like it's a unique trait that like a human being could just run themselves to death. Like an animal could if it's trying to survive. But like a human could just willingly like, I'm just never going to stop and decide that and make that decision and do it. And Goff was very much the same of like, you know, you just have to be persistent. And like, you just have to like never stop attacking the thing in front of you, never stop looking for, for truth or for learning or getting better or improving. And that is the kind of thing that eventually it pays off. Like there's no way. I oftentimes think like, oh man, I'm so fucking lazy. Like I'm so, so not like driven. I'm not driven to do these things. Even when I squatted all the time, I was training like Bulgarians. Like I always thought like, oh God, I'm just like, there's other people working harder right now. And like, when you start to look at it back, like, yeah, probably not. There probably wasn't that many people doing that kind of thing. Right. Not like it's some accolade, but it's like, oh, okay. Like, it's just like, if you're persistent, you don't think of yourself as I'm grinding.
Right.
You think of yourself as like, what's in front of me? I got to get that.
Yeah.
And like, like there's nothing around you that's like, like, oh, I got to motivate myself to fight for this or to look for this thing. So you're just doing it.
Yeah.
You're getting up in the morning and watching videos of 80s weightlifting, or you're, doing a podcast while you're at your job. Like you don't think about the other stuff around it. It's not like, how do I engineer this? It's just like, shit, I got to do this because it needs to be done.
It just needs to be. Someone has to do it.
Yeah,
and it's kind of how I feel about weightlifting podcasts. Is like someone has to have a podcast out that's like high quality.
Right.
It's consistent and it's like always there. And there's, I've gotten countless number of times like, hey man, long commute in the morning, love listening to the podcast every week. Like can't wait for episodes to come out. Or I had a guy send me like 3 voice messages today. I was just like on my computer, went on Instagram. And it was the podcast we did covering Euros. And he was just like, you guys were talking about weightlifting and this is how I feel it's changed. And this is why I think it's going to happen or what's happened. And it was just like a random guy in Ireland who's like a PhD and just like loves the podcast. And he like reached out and I sent him a couple things back. And it's like, you don't realize that like the thousands of downloads every episode, it's like thousands of real people who love it. And it like fuels their interest and love for weightlifting.
Yeah. I think you said something to me once. We talked about when we started writing the Snatch book, and we were talking about the idea of like doing good work, where it's like it's kind of the question of like, does this book need to be written? Like, should this exist?
Yeah.
And like, Josh needs to get paid, so we want to make some money.
Yeah.
No, but it's like it's a question of like, should this exist? And it's like, well, the first version of it is like that was done. What do we do now to make it something that should exist?
Yeah.
And it's a question of like, well, what can we say or do? And I remember in the beginning, I'm like, I wonder how big this will get. Like, if it gets up to like 100 pages, that'd be kind of nice. It'd be more thorough. And now I think about it, I'm like, that could have been 300 pages.
Oh, yeah.
The book could
Definitely.
be 350 pages and still not be 100% comprehensive. But like you said, okay, like let's put the history of the Snatch in there. So you researched it. We did that podcast.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like that's doing good work.
Yeah.
And that's like how you sustain a life that's worth living, is like you find something you really are passionate about, you do good work and you pursue it, and you just keep putting some stuff out into the world, and like you're bound to have some level of success. It might not be that you're going to become rich, but like the success you have will be something that's super satisfying, I think.
And you can make a living doing what you ultimately got into it doing. You just happen to like have been in it long enough to like make enough money to then sustain yourself.
I think there's a degree of like, if you're not having success in the things you're doing, you're probably not doing good work.
Yeah.
You're probably not producing something that the world cares about.
Yeah.
Because it's either just like too easy, or it's like you're just copying someone else, or you're doing the same thing as everybody else, and like you're trying to like arbitrage it by like, I'll just put out like cheaper shit and do a worse job, and like that'll like I'll make a bigger profit. And the reality is like that shit is just not, that's not how it works. Like that's not how the world is going to reward you. You have to be above and beyond what exists. And it's not just like I'm gonna one up my competitors. You don't want to compete. You want to do something that is unique and valuable, right? Like your podcast is like, there's no one else doing it. I don't even know if there's other podcasts that have as many varied guests of the caliber that you've had on.
As you say that on the show. Like you're on it.
Well, no, I mean, like if you think about from the top down, obviously number one, myself. Listen, as we work our way down, some PhDs below that.
To be fair, I looked through my most downloaded episodes in like a handful of the top 10 where it's all 1,000 plus. Max Aita, Max Aita, Max Aita, Max Aita, and I'm like, okay.
People want to hear this voice. No, but I think it's the kind of thing where it's like and maybe this is just like this giant like ego masturbation podcast episode that is like retarded. But the point I'm making is like I think that it's when you do podcast episode number 1 through 50,
Yeah.
you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
You don't know why you're doing it, but you're still doing it. And you look back at 200 episodes later and it's
Yeah.
like, wow, it's cool to see somebody create something out of nothing
Yeah.
and turn it into something. And they did it because you followed the things that mattered to you, not because you were like, I'm trying to like milk this and turn it into something. You don't sit there and think to yourself like, what's going to get the most clicks?
Yeah.
Right. And that's not
Yeah.
like that's not like a bad thing to do. You get clicks, you get people watching videos, and that brings people into the sport. But you're doing something that's like, hey, here's something that's genuine, and like you're gonna separate out to the type of people that want to listen.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't want to listen to your
Yeah.
podcast, right? But yeah, it's a thing that like has to be, I guess if you don't know it, like it's got to be something that I would look at as like, that's super awesome. Like
Yeah.
I see it as like, you've done a great job. You created something that has real value and is like, it stands on its own legs in that like it's legit.
Yeah.
It's not just like hacked together.
Yeah.
There's nothing that feels like, oh yeah, the Philosophical Weightlifting House, the Philosophical Weightlifting podcast is like, yeah, it's kind of like
Yeah.
him bullshitting and constantly talking shit and
Yeah.
calling people out. It's like, no, he got a guest on and talked about it, and like you walk away feeling like you've learned something.
Yeah.
Like you're right there with Josh, or that you're, clear up some issue, or you're like, that's really cool. I want to read
Yeah.
more about that.
Things
right?
and things that actually I look at from time to time, and some you can minimize it or you can just take it for what it is. Like I'll look at the reviews on different platforms. It might be like 20 to 45, but it's like 5 stars across the board.
Yeah, that's
like,
really cool.
You don't
that's
like
impressive.
Yeah, and it's like I don't just pay people to go on there and give 5 stars. I don't even tell people to go review.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
if you want to, that's fine. I'm not going to do it, even though I just did.
Yeah.
But
if you're interested, definitely.
If you're interested,
definitely do a 5-star.
Definitely do a 5-star.
Yeah.
If you don't listen to the podcast again.
Yeah.
But
no one wants you here.
No, your parents probably don't want you here.
Yeah.
But no, like those are just like honest reviews, right? And it's like an honest expression of the quality of the work. And I think one thing you've kind of hammered home, and I think one thing you might have, I don't know if you just thought this or it's being out here kind of in the Bay Area, but it's like get something out there, iterate on it, and it's a continual process of that. And I think that Weightlifting House was that. What you've done is that. What I've done is that. And ultimately, you get to a point where like, yeah, it's kind of like an ego stroke, but it's also like reflecting back on around 9, 10, 15, 20 years of just like working tirelessly at one thing and kind of making it successful your own way.
I was going to say, where do you think you'll be? What do you think episode 400 will be like?
Yeah, I thought about this recently. I was like, when do I stop? And I just like can't. It's like this like thing I just like won't allow myself to do yet. But hopefully, honestly, 400, hopefully you're on it. Yeah. We're just like doing the same thing.
I mean, I do too, because I'm expecting to be dead by the time that happens. How many years has it been since you started?
I probably started formally recording, I think, around 2017.
So, okay. It's less than once a week.
Yeah, so I had a period where I went on, because when I started doing the Weightlifting House podcast with Seb, we were doing both.
As much.
And then I started getting every guest I wanted to get on his, and then we did that for years.
Yeah.
And then I kind of took a break, and then I restarted this when I felt like Seb was kind of like, I could feel the podcast was taking a different direction, which it eventually did. Yeah. And then I just started like pumping this back up.
Yeah.
So it's been 200 episodes about once a week. It's 200 weeks. That was like 4 years.
So in 4 more years, like what would you see possibly doing more of or less of or changing?
Yeah, that's really hard to say. I think what we have now is like a really good recipe.
Yeah.
I just hope it becomes better quality.
Yeah.
And then that's honestly like Chris from the gym, get a really nice thumbnail done.
Yeah.
Maybe just be a little more intentional about it.
Yeah.
Honestly, and just like continue to, what we try to do is like skirt the outer boundaries of what we know, what we're doing, to where it's like, get Kyle Travis on to talk about his research, hopefully do some research, talk about that, just like continually live on that outer boundary of like what's interesting.
Yeah.
I think if we can always do that, it's always going to be a product and a project I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Once it's, hey, what's your teaching progression? I'm just going to check out. So it's like, if we can live on the boundary, I think it'll be something that will exist forever.
Yeah.
And once we stop doing that, I think that's when it's going to stop.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a kind of feeling of like this race to iterate.
Yeah.
Like, how can I learn more and do more and get
Yeah,
more? But
that's
the
right.
downside to that is as you discover answers,
Yeah.
you start to become like, oh shit, now I'm like, there's less of that.
Yeah.
And the things you start to look for are more niche.
Yeah.
And then you're like, fuck, like,
Yeah.
and you're never going to actually have every answer.
Yeah.
But very quickly you start to run out of that well runs very dry.
Yeah.
And you're like, what am I going to do next?
You literally have to create a project to like satisfy it.
Yeah. Then it's like, okay,
Yeah.
what can I do the next thing?
Yeah.
But I think that's such a long ways away that
Yeah.
it's just like not even worth worrying about.
I think, yeah, I think by then, I think the really cool thing and the really, I don't know if you feel this way, but like the kind of the frightening thing about it is that when you have so many opportunities in front of you, you don't know what those are going to turn into.
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
And you talk about this with the app all the time. And I think, you know, the weightlifting AI is going to be, it's like continually becoming better and better developed,
Right?
a cooler and cooler product. And I think it's like obviously becoming better, but like, what's that going to turn into? When does it stop becoming better?
Yeah,
when does it stop becoming something that's like you can so largely iterate on? And it becomes those smaller changes, and the smaller changes then kind of get washed out.
Yeah.
So it's like you say, it's like, is it as big as it's going to get? When does it get big? Like when does it, you know, stop getting bigger?
Right.
And you're kind of living in this weird space where you can't have an answer to any of that.
No.
Right. And that's like scary, but it's also kind of cool.
Yeah. It's same with lifting, right? It's like that happened to me. Like when I coached Alyssa and she won the Pan Ams, that was like the perfect, everything about that was perfect. The training cycle was perfect. It was a completely different philosophy.
Yeah.
I completely changed everything. She went 6 for 6, American records, Pan Am records, won it. And it was like, I walked away from that. I remember distinctly walking away from that thinking that could have been the Olympics.
Yeah.
It could have been anything. That was perfect. We did everything perfectly. And I don't feel like satisfied. And I feel like, am I just going to keep doing this again and again and again?
Yeah.
And like trying to chase after like, okay, so you coached an Olympic gold medalist and like you walk away from that and you realize like that's not going to be something that fulfills you.
Yeah.
And like the thing that's fulfilling is the pursuit of making something that's going to be fulfilling.
Yeah.
Like it's the chase of like building something versus like, oh yeah, we did it. Like you have this like check mark behind your name. Now like, I did that. And it's like, yeah, that's just not, it's not the thing. And like, I thought it would be. And I'm actually glad that that kind of happened at that point. Cause it would have been like, do you just keep fucking chasing after this like thing that's, you know, like whatever, like you're chasing after, like as an athlete, you're chasing after the idea of the Olympics. And as a coach, you're chasing after it. And it's almost like, it's just not, I don't know, it's like a weird, non-fulfilling thing. It's very awesome, I'm sure, to go to the Olympics and be a part of that, something way bigger than yourself, but it ends.
Yeah. And
you're not walking away like going to the office. Like to me, what I love is like going to the office and talking about training.
Yeah.
Talking about like, how do we make this process better? How do we add a button that's going to do something better? How do we refine? Because there's always tweaking. There's always something you can dive into and improve and make better. And like, you know, we've talked about like technology stuff that can happen in the next 5 years with like, you know, computer vision, these things. Like there's just so much more to do in that realm than there is in the realm of like, I'm just going to coach people to be the greatest, you know, because like there's always going to be somebody better. You're going to make the best athlete in the world. And then the next Naeem comes along and like fucks your shit up. And it's like, okay, like, or, you know, whatever, you miss a lift and they bomb and they miss the Olympics or who knows, right? Like, and that's a joyous thing to do to help people. But at the same time, it's like, well, I really love the idea of like doing something that makes me super excited that like, this is fucking cool. This is what I want to have. I want this to exist in the world because I would have wanted it. And like, so it's a different, like, there's just a different thing. And the podcast is something like that, where it's like how easy it is for you to just tweak a little bit and move off of weightlifting to be in sports performance. And then suddenly there's like a gazillion more episodes you can do that are on the borders of what's interesting to you versus like, oh, there it is. I do the weekly roundup of, you know, like blasting people on Instagram who are, you know, you're not doing weightlifting the way I think you should be doing it. Right. Like you need to experience it how I want to experience it.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't know. I think that's cool. I think it's cool that like, it's cool to me that like, I've been able to get connected to people like you, Seb, just a lot of people in weightlifting that like have that passion for like doing good work and being hyper focused on the thing that they love versus like I only care about like making some money out of this or making some name for myself out of this, right? Obviously those things are nice.
They're important.
And making money is important because if you don't, you can't keep doing it. But like, it's not so much the most important thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. I think like all of us together have had a really interesting like journey so far in weightlifting.
Yeah.
I think like Seb's relationship with Glenn and then creating Weightlifting House, and we all work with Seb now and kind of got connected through him and kind of made the transition to come out here and work with you, and it's been a trip.
Yeah, it's been cool. I told Joe the other day, I was like, it's really a huge bummer that you're leaving because I was like, I feel like I like to have conversations with you about training.
Yeah.
And I don't know anyone else that has those conversations.
Yeah.
You know, I can't talk to her about like the nuances of those things. And I can't sit there and be like, hey, like, why would we do this or that? Like, why do I make this choice?
Yeah.
And like, I can talk to you and you might have knowledge just way beyond me that you'll reference like, oh, well, there's a research study that proved this or shows this. And it's like, oh, okay, like I can take that and do something with it. And we'll still have conversations, I'm sure, but it's fewer and farther between for sure.
Yeah.
But it's like that to me is like a really, like I've been fortunate and I can say that for sure that's something that I've appreciated with you being here.
Yeah.
It's like that there's a person that like cares as much about really fucking niche, totally stupid things that nobody gives a shit about. But like that's fun because it's like, oh, I can actually like sit here and have a really awesome conversation.
It's so funny you say that because I like to think I try to take the first layer and skip past that a few more. And get like 5 answers to the first question where I think people stop after the first one.
Yeah.
A good example is I was watching someone coach and they were talking about like the knees caving in the squat. We're like, hey, keep your knees out.
Yeah, weak glutes.
Weak glutes.
There it is.
Yeah. So the first layer is like you're going to tell them like keep your knees out. That's not good technique for your knees to dive in. And I remember like there's whole like Chinese weightlifting thing where they're like you kind of intentionally teach it because the knee kicks in, it stretches the glute, you get a stronger contraction
or something.
Yeah, and it's like to me that's interesting because it's like the next layer.
Yeah.
And I kind of just like mention that like, well, you could get a bigger stretch in the glute and then get a stronger contraction.
Yeah.
Like I don't think most people intentionally do that. It's just like a movement strategy.
Yeah.
But those are things I kind of like really enjoy where you can look at everything within a training session and just kind of like peel it back and peel it back and peel it back. So when you're kind of in the trenches and you're coaching, you just like can kind of have fun with it.
Yeah.
Right.
I think about that a lot too. I think about it from more from the perspective of like, am I asking a question? Am I asking the right question? Or is what I'm asking relevant?
Yeah.
Like you could look at someone lifting and be like, oh, they do something really wrong. Like the knees is a great example. And the first question, people are like, oh, your knees come in. And the first question is that wrong?
Yeah.
What's wrong with that? And then you obviously go further into that, which is like, well, X, Y, and Z might be happening and this and that. And then it's like, well, I mean, like, like a great one is like people will talk about like posture and pain and they're connected. Oh, you're hunched over.
Yeah.
That's why your shoulder pain's coming from there. It's like, well, is it?
Yeah.
Like, is what I think true? Like, is anything I know true? Like, how can I prove it's true? But yeah, it's like people that don't do that, it's like their conversations aren't very interesting.
No.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's like they don't think to themselves like, maybe everything I know is not right.
Yeah.
Because then you're always working through this thing. That's what I always think. Like, I'm always wrong. It's
Yeah.
always got to be wrong because, like, if it was right, then everything would be happening the way I think it is, and it doesn't. You know, it's like, what am I wrong about?
Yeah.
Like, how do I keep being less wrong about that stuff?
Yeah. Which is like you have to be somewhat systematic.
Yeah,
and you have to be able to like pull things out and put things.
You can't
in.
keep track of it.
No.
Right? Yeah. If you're not systematically like approaching, like, okay, like, why do I make these decisions? Which decisions are kind of messing this up and incorrect?
Yeah.
And what do I have to assume is correct about these things? Yeah.
Yeah. This was a really fun episode. I think it was. Yeah, I kind of went into it like I kind of talk about. I think that's normally how they start, and then you just get into this like nice little flow state where you just chat about training and being in weightlifting, doing weightlifting.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of it too is like talking about like the podcast is like a huge thing for yourself, and so it's like to reflect on, where that comes from and like the value that you get out of it as a person, I think is important.
Yeah, and I think it's cool to go behind the scenes. And I think, we've talked about this a lot with what you've been able to do and what you were doing with Juggernaut, where you're like flying to Orange County.
Yeah.
And, what you had to do to be able to fly there and like time away and just like working tirelessly. And a lot of people see the result of it, but they don't see the process of it. And I think being able to give people the process, the grind, the grind don't quit.
The grind don't quit.
I'm up before the sun.
I'm hustling.
I'm hustling.
Check out my Instagram page, Entrepreneur Motivation.
Hustle for the muscle.
Hustle for the muscle.
Shout out to Kevin Cornell.
Oof. Oof.
But a lot of people, they don't really see what goes into it, and I think that's why it's cool to hear these stories. Because a lot of people probably didn't know that. Like, I didn't have a car for multiple years when I was actually in my undergrad, so I got someone drove me to school and picked me up every day.
You had to hitchhike.
Yeah, just hitchhike. Yeah. So like I would literally just be sitting in the room where a lot of our classes were held, reading like Brad Schoenfeld's hypertrophy book.
Nice.
I remember I was reading his book, and one of the professors walks by and he's like, "Wow, someone reading."
Nice. That's awesome. My coach's son, Tom Goff, when he was in basic training for the Marines, he would hitchhike from Camp Pendleton down to Mike Bergner's gym, which is very far. Every Friday, he'd hitchhike down there, and then he'd train all day Saturday and Sunday, and hitchhike back Sunday night, and then go and do whatever training and stuff he had to do. The dude didn't think twice about it. It wasn't it was just like, I gotta go train. Like, this is the only time I can train. So like, it's just like that same thing of like, you don't realize how hard you're working because it's just important to you to do it.
It's just, I think that's the thing. It's important to you to do it. And I think what I believe we're both ultimately trying to get at is you don't go into it with the intention of the outcome being one thing. You're just like, how do I make it happen?
Yeah.
Whatever it takes is what it takes. I don't quite know what that's going to be. All I know is like the next thing I can do is X, so I'll do that.
Yeah.
And then I got to kind of change or adjust slightly.
Very much.
And then you just kind of like go with it,
and
you see where it takes you. And
you just end up in a place that you didn't expect to end up at.
Yeah.
And you're like, fuck, like, how did I get here?
Yeah.
Which
is like, I think why you've had, so much success and so much notoriety is you just made decisions that have gotten you to such a unique place.
Yeah.
Like no one else has had that like storied background.
It's funny because I never think of that as being successful.
Yeah.
I always feel like, fuck, like shit's about to fall apart. Like, yeah.
But ultimately it's like, I think, I wonder at what point you'll kind of look back on it and feel that sense of pride. I don't know if you do now, but.
Yeah, I don't, that's weird. Like, do you look back on the podcast and think like, oh man, look what I did? It's kind of like you just think of it as like this thing you're constantly doing.
Yeah.
And like, you kind of just have to have the approach of looking forward only. You might reflect here and there.
Yeah.
Like, I'll tell Joe, like, we'll talk about some story. Like, hey, remember that person who used to train at the gym? Remember this guy? Or remember that girl? Or remember these lifts? Remember that competition? And like, we laugh about it and think about like, wow, yeah. Can you believe that? But then like, you just pile up medals or fucking lanyards or whatever. You just have like shit everywhere. And you're like, you think back like, God damn, it's been like, we've done so much shit. But then you don't sit there and like, you just move to the next thing.
Yeah.
Seb relayed this to me and I had the same thing. I think this tainted the way we do things. But when he trained, he was like, all I knew was weightlifting, like in the top level. So like, I just thought everyone was going to do 160, 200. Yeah. And I was like, oh yeah, it's the same. Golf just talked about like, you'll snatch 400 pounds one day. 180, 220. And I was like, I'm just doing 400 total. It's going to happen one day. And like, you just, so nothing ever seemed good enough. Yeah. I never filmed a lot of lifting. Glenn filmed my squatting at Cal Strength. I never filmed any of it because it was like, who cares about a 260 front? Who's going to shit about a 260 front squat?
Yeah.
That's nothing. Who cares about a 300 back squat? I did so many of them. It was just like, why would I film it?
Yeah.
I look back on it like that was a mistake, but it was like that same thing of like, you're just like focused on like, well, I'll film it when I front squat 300. Right. That's worth filming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think I feel the same way. When you're in process, it just is something you do.
You're just going. Yeah. You're just going forward and like, how do I fucking get the next thing?
How do we do the next thing?
Yeah.
I think, and I mentioned this in the podcast I did with, it was in episode 195, but like, and I think you said something similar, but like the only thing I've been proud of up to this point is getting into the PhD program, because that's like 10 years ago. That was me saying, this is what I want to do. And I don't know if I ever believed it, but like I just did what it took. So like I don't know if I had the belief. It's probably like with Seb, or even with you snatching 140 and clean jerking 170. Like those are fucking huge numbers.
Yeah.
Those are huge.
Yeah.
Like I see those as being, I saw those as like numbers that if I could ever reach that, I've fucking done it.
Yeah.
Because that just seems like,
yeah,
for some reason they have this like this really kind of like, I don't know,
this mystique.
Yeah. That's a great way to describe it. So I kind of told myself like, I'm gonna get a PhD, or I want to get a PhD, and you just kind of at some point you start the process, and you just do the next thing, and eventually you get to the point where it's like, oh, this could be real. And I imagine with Alyssa, that's kind of how you felt when it's like, Alyssa could, like,
this person could go
win
far,
Pan Ams, or go to Worlds, or
yeah,
potentially make it to the Olympics. And like at some point, it's like the start of that process. And it's like the process to get there. It's a recognition that it can happen or could happen.
Yeah.
And then it's the start of that process.
Yeah.
So kind of at this point now where it's like, I look at this as something I'm proud of, but also it's like, I don't want to get too comfortable. It's because it has to actually happen, right?
It's funny too, like you said, and I think to myself, like, it's so rare. I've been in a situation where I said no to something. Like a lot of it was like you. I remember having the conversation before you moved out. I met you in the coffee shop because it was like Raw Nationals.
Yeah, yeah.
And like I was like, oh, I'll hang out with Josh, right? Like, you know, like go chat with you, and like I went to that coffee shop in Vegas, and like we were just hanging out, and I was telling you about like, oh man, you know, it'd be nice to like get someone to run the gym and do all this. And then you messaged me and were like, hey, you know, could I move out there? And I was just like, okay, like, and Joe and I talked about it, and it wasn't ever a thought of like, well, what are we gonna get?
Yeah.
It was like, like we could do stuff, like we should do something with it, you know? Yeah. But then Kadra did the same, like, you know, she came out, and it was just kind of like, oh, let's just do it, right? Like, like all those decisions are reversible. So like there's no wrong answer. It's just go for it.
I think what helped me is feeling like it wasn't reversible. And I think they all are,
it's like a burning the boats kind of thing. Like you got to kind of make that jump to it.
You have to make it work. Yeah. And I think it's the recognition. And Seb said this to me, and he said it for a different context, but it sticks with me. He's like, if it does work out, you'll be okay. If it doesn't work out, you'll be okay. As long as you remember that.
Yeah.
Decide what you want to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the whole, like, this is a reversible decision. You might reverse it and be in a different situation because of whatever you ended up having to do. But like ultimately there's something to fall back on.
Yeah.
No one's completely fucked. No one is completely fucked. But if you treat it like we got to make this work, I think that's ultimately going to make it work.
I was just thinking about this morning. I was like, all the time, every single time I just made a giant decision to do something, like to open a gym or to move to California, to train with Abujayev, to like come back and to open a gym, to, you know, go down south and work at JTS, to like, you know, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Like every time I've done that, it always worked out.
Yeah.
Right. But the times when I've been like hesitant or like didn't commit to something, it always fell apart.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, we'll do this thing, and like just not putting effort in. Like this has never worked. But like, it's very much, golf was huge on the story of the Greeks burning the boats. Like you would talk about that like every fucking day. You know, like you just have to like put yourself in a place where you have no other option but to succeed.
Yeah.
And then you just keep going forward.
Yeah.
But it's like very much like when you do that, when you put yourself in a place where you're the one doing it and in charge of it, and there's no one else going to pick up the slack, like you're either going to succeed or you're not, right? There's no other choice, right?
And I was talking to Kyle Rockow. He's one of the other doc students at WVU under Dr. Hornsby. And he was saying that he got into the program and there was like 8 or 9 people or so many people. And then like half of them fell off after a few years. And I was like, that's weird. I couldn't imagine quitting. I couldn't imagine like starting something and not being able to finish it, especially something like that.
Yeah.
Right. Something that could be so impactful or so big and such an achievement, and saying in the middle, like, I can't do it. And Juma, one of the new guys at the gym, he's got a PhD in like some kind of genetics. And he's like, he helps like investors, figure out companies they want to. I don't know what he does, way past my pay grade. But he was like, yeah, when I was going through the program, he's like, at one point I had the paper to sign to drop out and quit.
Yeah.
And he's like, I was going to sign it. My wife took it from me, crumpled it up, and threw it away. Nice. And he's like, I was right on the edge.
Yeah.
He's like, just remember, you're going to be right on that edge.
Yeah.
And he's like, you just have to see it through.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the idea, right? Is like, if you don't have an option to quit, you know, I guess it doesn't make it easier, but you don't have the alternative.
Yeah.
So it's like, at least it's more sufferable. Like you can suffer more, you can suffer through it. And then at the end, it doesn't matter how much you had to suffer because you ultimately you did it.
Yeah, it's very much that. That's a powerful thing. Like, just not quitting.
Yeah,
it's really easy. Just don't quit. But it's hard to execute
real easy.
on it. But it's like
real easy to say that. But it's
I think about it too. Like, I mean, when I was training, like I trained like an idiot for 10 years plus.
Yeah,
like I squatted every day, max out every session.
Yeah,
and snatch and clean and jerk too half that time. And it was just like, well, I'm not gonna quit.
Yeah,
like I'll just the program didn't work. And I probably needed, I needed to learn how to lift better.
Yeah.
But it was like, there was never a moment of like, I'm just going to quit. This is too hard. You just kind of were like, it never even crossed your mind. It's just like, well, I got to keep doing this.
Yeah.
Like, you knew there was better stuff out there, but like, you're just like, well, I'm committed. Like, I'm committed. I'm going to do it. Yeah.
It's just so interesting to hear you say that because I know you didn't anticipate then like being able to leverage that as like, oh, I've done all this shit. And now I can take advantage of it and like, fucking use it as another springboard or platform.
So funny story actually about that is Seb was telling me the Bulgarians at Europeans knew who I was.
Oh, really?
And they knew I trained with Abdulayev.
Really? Holy
shit. They'd seen the videos on the internet. Yeah. And he was like, he was totally like, oh yeah, they know you. Like they know about you. And like they would totally be down to like, we'd hang out.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so we were talking about going to Bulgaria and training with Carlos and hanging out. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, and when someone knows that you've like been on the same level, like that helped a lot too. Like being strong, like showing up somewhere and like Misha Kokliev knowing me before I met him.
Yeah.
Like that's like a fucking huge, that's like when you're like, those are moments where you're like, yeah, that paid off.
Yeah.
I'm glad I wasn't a pussy.
Yeah.
Like I'm glad I actually tried as hard as I could every time.
Well, and it's the same thing. I mean, every single situation we've just described is like put ourselves out there, did something. And then the people we then like looked up to or wanted to work with or interact with were like, oh yeah, I know who you are and what you've done.
Yeah.
Like I remember seeing Danny Camargo at like one of the American Open Series meets, probably Arnold. And I was like going to go up to him and like introduce myself. And he's like, oh, I know who you are. Like, that's great to see you.
That's
and
cool.
It's like, yeah. It's like, and I have.
And when people don't know who you are, it's really
it's off-putting.
I can't stand them.
Wait, you don't know me?
Do you know my?
Have you
Googled me? Fuck you. Fuck you. You're a fucking nobody. You're beneath me, sir. This is a Starbucks. My bad. No, I totally. And it's the kind of thing like we were talking about before. It's like it's very much the kind of thing where it's like, it's not the intent. The intent is not to get recognized.
Yeah.
I never would have given a shit if anyone recognized me for doing anything. But it's fucking awesome when the people that you respect recognize you, right? Like I remember when I coached somebody, I can't remember who it was, but they broke a couple records in powerlifting, and Boris Sheko like emailed me and was like, "Congratulations,
oh, that's
coach."
Awesome.
Yeah, like stuff like that. Like I just would never like tell people about it, but it was like I tell Joe, but like that was like Abajev saying those things. Goff once told me, he told my parents like he's like, Max is like the one of the hardest working people I've ever worked with, and I've worked with thousands.
Yeah,
like just kind of things like that, where it's like a compliment that like, oh yeah, that meant a lot, more so than just like this like need for me to be seen as like, oh, this is like an expert. This guy's like something important in weightlifting, because like, what does that mean? It's like nothing. It's just like building an ego, right? But yeah, like those are moments where it's like you can really. It's like when the people that really matter appreciate what you've done. That's, I think, the biggest victory. Yeah. More so than making money or being whatever. It's like when someone that you looked up as like a major figure or who is important to you would say that, like that's the biggest win you can have in life.
And it's actually interesting you say that because at my place right now, I have a huge poster of Danny.
Yeah.
And then a huge poster of Coach Mary. And I have like these cards that people have written me and like signed. and a few of them are from people I've coached, and they're
Yeah.
like, you're an incredible coach. Like, I appreciate
cool.
you so much. Like, thanks for all your hard work.
Yeah.
Because like Liz, she's a master's athlete I work with, and whenever I'm in Columbus, I'd make sure I go out of my way to give her a one-on-one session and like spend some time with her. And like, I don't charge her for that or anything. Like, I try to see her as much as I can.
Yeah.
And then even Sam from the gym gave me like a handwritten note of
Nice.
like, you've
That's
done
cool.
such a good job in helping me out.
Yeah.
And you have a special talent for this. Like, those are the things that are lasting and meaningful.
Yeah.
It's not like, I don't know, the internet clout.
Yeah, it's weird, right?
Right.
The clout just seems like it means so little. Like the idea of chasing it is like,
It's because the people don't know you.
yeah,
Like, people know you as like a caricature.
right.
Like,
yeah.
even
Well, it's their own perception of
it's-
you.
yeah,
It's what
that's
you've crafted to show people and what they think, right? Like you tell people I'm tough. Like I'm,
Yeah.
I'm the best this or that. And people will meet you and ask you that. Cause people will do it to me. Like they'll be like, oh my God, like you squat every day thing and like
Yeah.
all this. Like to me, it just was never a thing. It was
Yeah.
just like, oh yeah, I just like tried to train really hard.
Yeah.
Like it never was like, I didn't name it. I didn't write a book about
Yeah.
it. Like you just kind of did it. And we're like, that doesn't work well. Like it kind of works, but not well. Like I'm not going to have anyone do
Yeah.
that. And like, yeah, it's just like funny. Cause like people will come to you and have a perception of it. And like now it's with social media and everything. It's like, that's the thing everyone does.
Yeah.
And it's a much faster, more efficient, more refined way to get paid and to make yourself
Yeah.
famous. But yeah, it's funny. Like, I guess a lot of this kind of comes back to the idea of like doing something that your intent is to do something genuine and do good work in it.
Yeah.
Because you love what it is.
Yeah.
Not because you're trying to get something else out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what your podcast has done a great job of, because like, Lord knows it's not popular. Very few people have. No, but like it's the kind of thing that like you can be really proud of it because like you can look back and be like, man, I did 200 episodes that were exactly the episodes I wanted.
That's
to
right.
do. I didn't sit there and think to myself like, oh, I should get on so and so because they're more exciting, or I should have like I should call out Larry Wheels or something and like, be that guy because it's a quick, cheap way to get excited people around you.
And it's funny because
like,
the episodes I didn't release. I felt bad, but it's like I can't attach myself to that.
Yeah, this isn't my thing. Yeah.
It's not. It doesn't like represent it well.
Yeah.
And obviously we can keep going on. It's been an hour and 45 minutes. I could talk here for 2 hours.
It's brutal.
So Max, people hear this and they're like, I know Max Aita now, and I would love to be coached by him, and have him obsess and love my training as much as anyone else.
Yep.
Where can they go if they want to?
Well, if you have less than 100,000 followers, fuck you. You can find me, my coaching at teamaita.com, or you can message me on Instagram, Max_Aita. But also you can try out the weightlifting.ai app. It's
like your I say passion project, but it's like the thing you've literally given yourself to the last like handful of years. Yeah,
it's the thing that I'm most proud of and will be most proud of as time goes on, for sure.
Yeah.
But try that and that's where you can find me.
Yeah, and if you guys want to follow me, it's Josh_PhilWL, PHILWL, philosophicalweightlifting.com if you want some remote coaching or want to consult or just want to kind of check things out. If you want to support the podcast, we are sponsored by Virus INTL and Onyx Straps, or Onyx Weightlifting Co. So if you go to Onyx, you go to Virus, you go to Weightlifting House, use code PHILWL, PHILWL at checkout to save some money and get some kickback to us. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this very special episode of the podcast, episode number 200, and we will catch you guys next week for episode 201.